That's pretty cool. So for those of you that have been around for the last 5 or 6 months as a part of that Kingdom Come journey, I hope that encourages your socks off. It's just one piece of evidence of what's possible when the goodness and grace of Jesus increasingly rules over every area of every heart. And that's a big deal in our city and from those churches. So something really unique that's happening around here and all over our city. And I hope you're encouraged, those of you that are a part of it. If you're newer to Doxology and you're not a part of that yet, you're kind of curious about what that looks like, you can catch up on everything at kingdomcomefw.com if you want to go do that on your own time. And I'd encourage you to. I'm sure you're aware, there's a financial piece to doing things like that, and there certainly is with this one. And just as we're responding to the goodness and grace of Jesus, as we push back against the deceitfulness of wealth in our hearts. But if you're one of those people that comes into churches and you're a little suspicious of stuff like that, like, trust me, I get it. I listen to a lot of preachers, and sometimes when I hear preachers talking about money, I just kind of roll my eyes, you know? Hopefully, you'll see that this is something that's very, very different from that. So Kingdom Come FW, and we'd love for you to be in on the whole invitation. And really all 4 of the invitations of Jesus, so that you don't misunderstand and you can have a little context for what we're doing here. So kingdomcomefw.com, and check that out if you're interested in that. We're going to be in Mark 3 this morning. If you got a Bible, you can power up or open up today. Mark chapter 3 is where we're going to be. And if you're just hopping in, we're on the home stretch of this journey through the first section of the Gospel of Mark that we've called the Unexpected King. For the first 3 chapters of his Gospel, Mark does really what you could think of as character development, as he shows us and introduces us to a king that pretty consistently pushes against everything that our world and our culture tends to assume it takes in order to change the world for good. We see a king that pushes against that on a pretty regular basis. And we also meet some pretty ordinary people that we're going to watch transform over a long period of time into people that learn to live with Jesus and learn to live like Jesus everywhere they find themselves. And that's the part that Mark's going to dial in on with us today in Mark chapter 3. We're going to see what it was that set people like St. Peter and St. John and Bartholomew and James and Matthew and the rest of those guys apart from the crowd. We've already touched on it a few times. It's not that they were made of different stuff than you and I are, or that they had a better education than you and I have, that they came with a better pedigree than us. In fact, Mark sort of goes out of his way to make sure that we don't misunderstand, that we know that it's the opposite of that. They are very human all along the way, and very relatable if you pay attention to them in the story. There's something else that happened to them, and Mark puts it on the bottom shelf for us to say if it happened for guys like that, it can happen for somebody like you. Don't miss it. And yet it's the missing it thing that I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple of weeks. I don't think any of us really want to. But there's a fairly deep fear that runs through a whole lot of our hearts that we might, or that we might already have missed it. In fact, there's a philosopher named William Irvine. I'm not sure if he's a Christ follower at all, but he uses a phrase that stuck with me. He talks about misliving. Misliving your life. Misliving your life is when you succeed at a whole bunch of things that don't actually lead you to the life you wanted to begin with. It's where you invest your life in good things that actually carry you away from the good life you were after all along. And that's where the fear comes in for a whole lot of us. Because most of us know when it comes to misliving, you really can only spot it in the rearview mirror. Occasionally you can see it out the side window in somebody else's life, but it's hard for you to ever spot misliving out your own windshield, which is what makes it so troubling for most of us. How do you know that the path you're on today is going to land you where you're wanting to end up someday? When you face disappointment in your life or discouragement or an obstacle along the path that you're on, how do you know when it's time to turn around and head down a different path and when it's time to just push through the tension and press on? When you got a decision to make, where to go to college, what career or calling to chase, who to date, when to break up, whether or not to get married, or have children, or buy a house, or retire, or how to spend your retirement. Those are just the big decisions. Those of us that are paying attention know that sometimes the decisions that seem like small decisions in the moment turn out to be the biggest decisions over time. And there are plenty of people, I assume in your life, like there are in mine, who would be more than happy to give you turn-by-turn navigation for your life, in their words, but doesn't it often seem like the people who are willing to give you turn-by-turn navigation tend to be just as lost as you are? It feels like sometimes we're trying to navigate our life and we got all kinds of apps open to try to give us directions, but they all give us conflicting ways to go. Here's the really uncomfortable question that a lot of us wrestle with that we want to try to wrestle down this morning. How do we live now towards a life we won't regret later? How do we live now towards a life we won't regret later? As we get to Mark chapter 3, Jesus is surrounded by thousands of people, but only a handful of them are going to live into the life that he came to give. And I want to show it to you. Look at Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and surrounding around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep people from crowding him, for he healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You're the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. That's a pretty impressive scene, isn't it? I mean, you got a carpenter turned rabbi who comes on the scene, and what seems like just a matter of weeks has gone so viral, there are people from all over the known world that are flocking to check him out. In fact, Mark mentions some of the places that they came from. He mentions Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, the regions across the Jordan, around Tyre and Sidon. Mark is just saying, this is not one of those local celebrity things. You know, like Jesus is one of those friends that Chris Young and Kane Brown talk about, your famous friends that you probably never heard of. This is not that. Tyre and Sidon were Gentile provinces that were about 100 miles from Galilee. So just think about that, okay? So you got a car. What celebrity would you get in your car and drive 100 miles to see? Like, that's a pretty short list for most of us, isn't it? There are a couple of people maybe on that list, and you've got a car. These people traveled 100 miles by foot or on the backs of animals. So this trip that they took to get in the presence of Jesus, more than just a hassle. And many of them were Gentiles. Jesus is a Jewish rabbi. The people from Idumea did something really similar. So Idumea was like a smaller version of New York City. It was famous for being a multiracial, multi-ethnic, politically divided melting pot and everything that came along with that. So what Mark wants you to see in this crowd is people that represent every different path of life, every different worldview, flocking to Jesus in hopes that he has what they're searching for. Because whatever your background, wherever you're walking into this moment this morning, what Mark wants to see is yourself and the people that you love in that crowd. And they're after all kinds of things. Mark tells us they want relief. They want healing. Some of them want the social capital of being connected to a popular movement. Mark says they heard about what he was doing, and they were so desperate to get in on it that they were pressing in on Jesus like teenagers at a Taylor Swift concert, to the point that Jesus has to get a little two-man boat and push out a little ways from the shore so that the crowd doesn't tear him apart. Okay, so pause right there. It seems like the crowd's on the right track, doesn't it? But pay attention, because Mark set you up. They're all a part of the crowd. They're crowded in a crowd around the reputation of Jesus, hoping that maybe somehow some of them will get off on them, you know? They can go back to their otherwise normal lives with a little extra Jesus pop on top of that makes everything better. Like if he just fixed this one problem for me, they thought. If he just answered this one question that I have, if he just give me this one blessing just this one time, then our whole life would be on track, at least until they need another Jesus fix in the future. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that why a lot of people come to church? But notice, that's not what Jesus is offering. He's not inviting people to find a quick fix for one area of their life. Like he's just a condiment that you sprinkle onto an otherwise okay something, give it a little extra pop to make it even better. He's offering them a whole new way of living here. And Mark wants you to locate yourself in the crowd so that he can invite you into something better than what just the crowd ever found. The crowd represents misliving in real time. In a world that thinks that change comes through life hacks and quick fixes and rulers that wield powers with big platforms and high positions, Jesus, surrounded by the crowd, walks away from it. And he climbs a mountain and he invites 12 ordinary men to something different. Because the life that Jesus came to give is not found in a fix. It's found in an invitation that Jesus wants to extend, Mark's point, to someone just like you. Let me show you. Look at verse 13. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. Now, some of your translations may have the words, or your translation may have a note there in verse 14 that says, Jesus appointed 12 and named them apostles. So this happens sometimes. That phrase, and named them apostles, is included in some of the ancient manuscripts that archaeologists have discovered over time, but it's not found in all of them. And translators always want to do a really good job of letting you know when that's the case so that you can be confident that what you're holding, what you're reading, is actually what Mark was writing. And in this case, those words are probably a note that the scribe added later to just make sure everybody understood what was happening there. But it doesn't change the meaning. It doesn't change the point. Jesus will certainly give them that title later on. And here's the first invitation, and you see it with or without those words. When it comes to not misliving your life, the first invitation is this: let Jesus tell you who you are. Let Jesus tell you who you are. So think about these guys. These guys are guys who have been picked last for every educational, occupational, sociological kickball game their entire life. And yet they find themselves in this moment where they discover they are wanted by Jesus. They are known by Jesus. They're desired by the one who knows everything about them. You see that in verse 13? But think, they haven't done anything yet. What is there to want? They haven't made themselves presentable yet. They haven't performed for Jesus yet. They haven't done anything religious that we've seen yet. They haven't cleaned up their life yet. And yet Jesus sees them and knows them and calls them and invites them and tells them who they are and who they're becoming. And you even see it as he begins to name them. See, one of the easiest ways to mislive your life is to spend your life trying to define yourself, trying to make a name for yourself, or trying to live up to or live into or live down to the expectations of someone around you rather than one who designed you. Misliving happens when you build your life on a name that you give yourself, or a name that the crowd has given you, instead of the one that Jesus gives. The truth is, a whole lot of us are living out of totally false identities. Stories that we've come to believe about who we are based on our fears, or based on our failures, or based on a future that somebody else declared over us. And here's the thing, we don't just believe those stories, we organize our whole lives around those stories. So somewhere along the way, we picked up the belief, I'm not enough. I'll never measure up. We don't just think that. We build a whole life trying to prove it wrong. If we picked up somewhere along the way, in order for life to work, I have to be in control of it, We don't just believe that in our head, we manage our whole life to make sure that we're never out of control of anything or anyone, anytime, anywhere. I am what I achieve becomes a whole life chasing success and achievements by all of the metrics that will always sit just beyond our ability to grasp them. Even if part of the narrative we believe is that we're awesome and that we always catch all of the metrics. What we discover along the way is that just beyond the metrics that we catch are more metrics to catch. And at some point, we'll find ourselves unable to catch a metric or achievement behind the thing. We'll never grasp all the things. And yet Jesus steps into that and does something radically different. He doesn't tell these guys to figure themselves out. He doesn't tell them to find themselves inside themselves. That's popular in our world, but the truth is finding yourself inside yourself is a little like peeling an onion. Like you search under a layer and you expose a layer that you think is the layer, and then you let it sit there for a little while, and before long the layer becomes dry and crusty and it doesn't work for you anymore, so you peel the layer to find another layer and then another layer and then another layer. The dirty little secret is when you finally peel back all the layers of an onion, eventually you're left with nothing. And nothing is not worth giving your life to. Jesus does something that pushes against the way of the world. He doesn't tell these guys to make something of themselves or to find something within themselves. He calls them and he begins to tell them who they are. And that's the first turn in these guys' life that sets their life apart from the crowd. But it's not the only thing Jesus does in the passage. He doesn't just give them a new identity and then send them on their way. He gives them a whole new way to live. Look at verse 14. He appointed 12, why? That they might be with him. Okay, don't rush that. Before they get around to doing anything or going anywhere or saying anything or leading anyone, Jesus invites them to be with him, which pulls against our instincts. It's not necessarily what we feel like we showed up for today, right? We want a process. We want a checklist. We want behaviors. We want influence and impact, results. And Jesus starts by inviting them to live in his presence. And not just a recurring calendar appointment for a few minutes first thing every morning. That's not the invitation. He's inviting them to reorganize their whole life around remaining in his presence. To go where he's moving as he moves. To listen to what he's saying in real time. To watch how he responds to pressure. To see what he does when he's tired, when he's interrupted, when he's rejected and oppressed. And think about what happens. We tell our kids this all the time. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Because we instinctively realize that we tend to become like whoever we're constantly with, right? Which means one of the easiest ways to mislive your life is to leave Jesus behind for big chunks of it. We talked about this during the Kingdom Come journey, didn't we? We'll come back to it next spring when we look at the divided heart. We live our lives, so many of us, like those cafeteria trays we got in elementary school, or the divided plates that my family uses at Thanksgiving, right? Where we've got a section for work, we got a section for home, we got a section for friends, we got a section for hobbies, and some of us even have a section for the kingdom of God. And for some of us, it's even the biggest section. But it's just a section. May even be the most important section to us. But we've left Jesus behind for significant chunks of our life. Jesus is saying, and these guys are going to show us, the invitation of Jesus is better news than that. To walk into every moment and every environment, practicing the presence of Jesus when we're there. Walking into any place we are, looking for where Jesus is moving. Looking for what he's seeing. Listening to what he's saying. Sensing how he's responding, learning and being patient. And be patient. It's going to take these guys years to figure this out. But they're invited increasingly to learn to be with Jesus. That's the second invitation. Learn to be with Jesus. And from there, they're invited to more. Not just someday down the road when they get it all figured out. Immediately, they're invited to more. You see that in verses 14 and 15? He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and have authority to drive out demons. Okay, he doesn't just sign them up for the lecture. He invites them into the lab. And he turns them loose immediately. He doesn't just say, hey, sit here till you understand everything. He says, be with me. And let's go immediately. He gave them responsibility before they had what it took. And that's important because if you waited till they were ready, we know this, they'd never go. And notice he sends them out, it says, to preach. Okay, but don't worry, not necessarily this. In fact, we only have a couple of instances in the whole scriptures of any of them doing something like this, like talking publicly in front of a big crowd. This word's less specific than that. It actually just means to proclaim, to be a person that connects the dots between the good news of the kingdom and the people that you meet every day. He sends them to preach, sends them to carry the message of the kingdom and connect the dots to the people that they meet every day, and to have authority over things that they've never handled before. And if all of that freaks you out just a little bit, take heart, you're in good company. They didn't know how to do it either. And in fact, the section of Mark that we're going to look at right after Easter, you're going to be awfully encouraged because they get it wrong way more than they get it right. I mean, Jesus is constantly having to go back behind these guys and clean up their messes. They're going to flunk the exact same test 5 or 6 different times. But that doesn't stop Jesus from sending them. Because as they go, what they're going to discover is that they have no choice but to depend on him in real time. And listen, the exact same thing is true of you. As you're walking with Jesus in ordinary places, you're going to see him moving or sense that he's moving in places that you're not ready to step into, towards conversations that you don't feel ready to have, towards people that you're pretty sure you don't want to love, towards steps that you're not sure you're ready to take. And that's the best possible news. The invitation is to lean in before you're ready. To lean in before you're ready. Because one of the easiest ways to mislive your life is to wait till you feel ready to obey. To wait till you don't need to trust him before you trust him. Formation doesn't come before mission, it comes through it. And we're going to watch it play out in their lives, hopefully while at the same time seeing it play out in our own lives in real time every day. Jesus tells these guys who they are. He invites them to be with him in every moment, and then he forms them as they follow him into things that they're not ready for. And then, and here's the part that we don't always expect, and maybe the part that is the least comfortable of all of them. He doesn't send them out alone. And he doesn't send them out with the people that we might have expected. Look at this. Mark doesn't just tell us what Jesus did or said. He also tells us who he chose, and he lists them one by one. Remember, let Jesus call you who you are. Let Jesus give you your name. Some of these guys get names from Jesus, and some of them came with names that we wouldn't expect to see on the resume of people that Jesus uses. Look what it says, verse 16. These are the 12 he appointed. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, Rocky. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Okay, these are the guys that were there for everything. And some of them we know. We've heard of St. Peter, James and John and Andrew, maybe even Matthew. But there's some guys on this list that when you read through it, most of us just go, wait, who? We live in a world where visibility equals value, where influence is measured by attention. And you see some of that in some of these guys, but you don't see it in all of them. That's not nearly all of their stories. The kingdom of God doesn't rest on the shoulders of the famous, but it's placed and carried in the hands of the faithful. And Jesus doesn't just form them as individuals. He forms them as they're on the move together, which means if all you ever do is sit in a crowd and listen and observe and consume and learn by yourself, you might live your life fascinated by Jesus, but you'll almost certainly not be formed by him. And the same goes if you just surround yourself by people who look like you and think like you, people that you like and people who like you. We hit on this when we talked about Matthew. Matthew lived the first half of his whole life as the face of oppression towards the people that he grew up with, which almost certainly included James and John and Simon and Andrew. They're in the same group. Simon the Zealot was a member of a political party who were extremists in the truest sense of the word. They were set on killing people like Matthew and ignoring fishermen like James and John. Nathanael's going to reveal himself as a racist. Thomas is going to reveal himself as a doubter. And Judas is going to reveal himself as a snake. And that's part of the formation. Mark wants us to know at the outset, these guys were together the whole way. And they weren't together the whole way. Transformation doesn't happen in a crowd. And it doesn't just happen in our comfortable groups. It happens as we're committed to messy, inconvenient, and uncomfortable community that isn't natural or normal or necessarily just filled with the first people we'd choose. You will mislive your life in an echo chamber or in community that only ever fits your affinity. Jesus invites these followers to commit to messy community. He invites them to commit to messy community. That's one of the reasons we do community the way we try to do it here at Doxology. We try to form community groups around Doxology, around geography and proximity, not just affinity. And part of that is to help us shrink our relationship circles so we're more likely crossing paths with people in our community in more places than just one meeting every week. Some of it's for the sake of mission. So we're all together intentionally blessing the people around us so that if anyone in your neighborhood woke up tomorrow and needed somebody who genuinely loved Jesus and would sacrificially love them, they wouldn't have to get in a car to find a whole group of people that are committed to that. But a huge part of it for us is that it inevitably puts us in community with people that we wouldn't necessarily choose, people that push us and sharpen us and reveal things about us and knock rough edges off of us because we're intentionally in relationships with people who live near us but might not be anything like us. That's good for us. That's why when our team gets a call from somebody that says, hey, I tried the group in my neighborhood, those people aren't really a good fit for me. We're always a little bit conflicted with that. There's part of us pastorally that just wants to lean in and say, hey, don't quit. Like, let us find one that's a better fit. We can help. Let's try something different. You're not married to a group just because you live by them. And we want to do that. But there's also a pastoral part of us that just wants to say, oh, go back to that one. It's perfect if it's not a great fit. Because formation happens best in inconvenient, messy, uncomfortable community with people that are nothing like us, but are learning to follow Jesus alongside us. Like the first group that Jesus put together. And it worked out pretty good for those guys, didn't it? So let's come back to the question that we started with. How do you keep from misliving your life? 4 things about these guys that set them apart from the crowd, and that over time are going to form them into people that look and live and lead and love a whole lot more like Jesus than they started. Let Jesus tell you who you are. Learn to be with him in every moment. Lean in before you feel ready and commit to messy community. The crowd made a commitment to a gathering and they stayed fascinated by Jesus, but largely went away unchanged. The 12 found themselves formed over time into a totally different life. And the question Mark wants you to wrestle with, even early in the book, which one will you become? The key to avoiding misliving is not just good intentions. It's not any of the individual decisions that we make, big or small, any day. It's all about the direction that you're aimed from whatever your starting point is in this moment. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to feel ready. You just have to be willing to say yes, to stop standing in the crowd and to say yes to the invitation that Jesus has put right in front of you and trusting him with whatever he has next for you from here. Would you bow your head with me? In fact, as your head is bowed, I want to give you just a couple of moments of space to listen for him rather than just listen to me. To ask him, is there an invitation in this for me? Is there something that you're inviting me to commit to? Lord, I pray for the person that's walked into this room this morning and is just sensing that they've lived their whole life out of a false identity, trying to chase or run away from something that was said about them at another time, or a name that they've tried to take on themselves that's different from what you've called them, and the news of what you've called them is so much better. Lord, let them run towards you. For a person that's walked into this room, Lord, who never knew that the presence of God in our everyday life was something that we could experience, Lord, that they would hear the best news ever. That it's not just an invitation for us to be with you, Lord, that you took the initiative and you came to be with us, that Jesus came to the earth to seek us because he wanted us. And he wanted us so badly that he went through all of life and kept all of the rules and lived the life that we were designed to live but didn't, and yet took the penalty that we deserve for sin when he died on a cross. And he carried all of the sin and the shame into a grave and then walked out without it to offer us life and hope and forgiveness and purpose and his power and presence with us wherever we go. And he offers us an already paid for gift that we simply have to receive. Lord, for the person that has never ever received that gift, Lord, I pray in this moment they would tell you in the privacy of their heart, I'll receive that gift. I'm putting my trust in you rather than whatever I've been trusting before, and I want your presence with me forever from here. And then, Lord, I pray for those of us that have come to this moment afraid of the next step that you're inviting us into because we don't feel ready or prepared. We're not sure exactly what it is that it'll look like when we get there, and we're struggling to trust you that it'll actually be better. Lord, would you allow us to trust you that it'll actually be better and to lean in before we feel ready? And for some of us, either formal community or the families that we're in or the people that live near us that have knocked off some rough edges or exposing some things in us, Lord, would you let us stay committed to a really messy community so that we could be the kind of people that spur each other on towards love and good works wherever we go, and that help each other become more like Jesus in everything we do. Lord, this is our life, and we want to live it well. So would you lead us in living it well? We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.